like Jennifer and her background and what she brings to this organization. I think UKG has a lot of opportunity right now to fix some things that they broke in the last couple of months through kind of the pace at which they move through the layoffs. Also, some of the things the challenges they've had over the last 6 months to a year with sort of the customer sort of changes that they've made around customer care. A lot of that was they were working on fixing some situations they knew had happened because of the merger acquisition, because of the transition from on-premise workforce management systems to cloud workforce management systems. They were going through some of the things that many organizations had taken years and years to go through in the matter of like 2 or 3 years.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. We're recording today on July 31st. So hopefully you're in the middle of your own summer getaway this weekend. And hopefully by the time you get back, you'll have time to listen in on all the fun news. I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group. We're a research and advisory firm. Joining me today is also my co-host and our Director of Research at Sapient Insights Group, Cliff Stevenson. Cliff, welcome to the show again. We've got lots of tea going on. We were spent almost like a half an hour in the green room just trying to get it all organized today, weren't we?
Yeah, it's been no shortage of news. If anything, we have to often cut stuff, which of course, as I always say, you can find in the notes on both LinkedIn and YouTube, along with everything we're going to talk about. And also, because we're in the South of the United States, we're thinking very summary, but I realize we have our Aussie listeners and those of you in the Southern Hemisphere, so hope you're staying warm, which seems weird for considering our locations. But yeah, a lot of news. They didn't take a break for us. Even though we were gone a week, going through the survey data, you'd think the world would stop, but it didn't. It kept going. A lot of exciting stuff.
It was a fun week. We had the whole team here in North Carolina, in our area, in the Raleigh-Durham area. We held a really great Change Leadership on Diversity roundtable that was held at the Pendo headquarters here. And we had Lindsay Beggar, who runs the CEO of 321 Coffee, which is an amazing organization that is built around developing work and creating an environment for neurodiverse workforces, and is focused on, providing a service to the community through a great and amazing series of coffee and tea products. So if you're interested in that, follow us on our HR Huddle. You'll see, I think we're going to be out there. It's going to be a great sort of live podcast that we did at the event. The roundtable was really interesting. We'll maybe talk a little bit about that today and some of the things that we heard there. But we also spent the week, as you said, talking about the HR strategy and system survey, 27th year, 27th edition. It was a proud kind of mama moment for me as I kind of sat back and listened to you and Tammy and the whole group, right, take ownership of the research this year. So I was trying really hard to kind of let everyone else take a big role in that research. And because I've owned it and been sort of my baby for the last 10 years, you guys did an amazing job this year, Cliff. So just, I don't often acknowledge how much hard work that effort is, but we got over 1,000 more responses than we did the previous year. I'll let you give the final numbers. We had over 20% more distributors this year, which meant the relationships we've created are really strong with the community. And just data so good this year. So much information about what people are doing on a real day-to-day basis with artificial intelligence, what they're doing in how they're leveraging the HR technology that they're using every day in their work environment, and how they're building it into their change processes and their ESG discussions and their conversations about, the outcomes they're trying to achieve as business leaders inside the organization. So I'm excited. That's my little soapbox. It was a good event this week, wasn't it?
It was amazing. And I guess this will be the first full announcement, but although the final digit could change, it's 3,314 different organizations that took part this year, even after the cleaning and consolidation. And we just had more people than ever. And I want to thank you, the listeners. And, if you happen to be one of the people that took it, I could just tell a lot of thought and care went into it. We had a larger number of people that took more of the survey, if that makes sense. And I had my own sort of mama moment where it's like, okay, well, now I'm being very protective of the data. I almost don't even want to say anything. I was like, no, that's all mine now. But there's a lot of really cool stuff. Everything from, yes, those big AI stories, but maybe it's something like implementation. And we just did so much of a follow-up on listening to the feedback that we got from all of you survey takers and everyone that, bought the report and used it, said, we want to go deeper in. We want to know the why. And there's a lot of that follow-up where you'll see, okay, there's less people doing this than we expected, whatever it might be. Why is that? Or there's more people, or, just what are the reasons behind the change that you made? And I love saying that because, just being able to answer questions is what we're all here for, right?
Yeah. So we're a couple of things, I think, just to kind of get a sense as to where you'll be able to get updated information, because the survey is closed. Although the reason the number keeps changing is not because we keep finding more people that get out, because we've actually gone through all the weeding process. It's because before Tammy can finish consolidation, she's got to leave a link open. And somewhere, somehow, people are still finding the link. We've had like 5 completions, like real completions of the survey since the survey's been closed. Tammy she'll tell me, never tell anybody that, because she doesn't want anybody to know that it might still be open. But that's what's been happening, right? Like people come, I just had an email yesterday. Someone's like, I missed it. What do I do now? Yeah, it's tough. We are closed at this point. Tammy can't take any more data. And I think our cleaning team would revolt at this point. But what I will say is that there's a lot of different places where you can hear us speak about it, where you can hear us talk about it. There's also going to be an opportunity to buy a bundled grouping of that research. If you didn't get a chance to participate and you aren't going to get the complimentary version, what you'll have an opportunity is sort of buy a version that you can get this year's and next year. So that's coming out in the next week or so. So you'll probably hear that about the time this drops in a week and a half. And then also too, we love to get questions. If there's something specific you're looking for, feel free to reach out. Maybe it's something simple that we can answer and we don't mind sort of passing on some information that we have. Maybe it's something that is a little bit bigger, but we can maybe pull something out of the environment that will work for you and work within what you're trying to accomplish. But if you're wanting to come talk to us and hear a little bit about where we're at, we're going to be in a couple of different places in the upcoming months. One is we're going to be at the Oracle Cloud World on September 9th and 11th. That's going to be you, Cliff. You'll be there. You'll be representing on the analyst front and sort of hearing some of the updates that Oracle is going to be setting out that week, correct?
That's right. And for those of you that aren't watching this on YouTube, that have never seen before, just look for the tall gentleman wearing lots of pink. Yeah. That's their company colors, and I love it. And I have updated and upgraded my wardrobe to feature lots of pink. So
yeah, Cliff has a better pink wardrobe than I do at this point, which I didn't think that was possible. So we're getting there. Also, again, if you have not had the opportunity to sign up for the HR Technology Conference, we have $150 off code, which is, I think it's Sapient, but I'm not sure. So we'll put that in the notes, the code for the $150 off, because we'll be doing our keynote mega session there, where we deliver every year the key findings from the HR system strategy. This year, we're going to be focusing on the voice of the customer session. That is going to be held on Wednesday at 1 p.m. So make sure you're there. Make sure you're signed up for that session. Put it on your calendar so you don't forget. It's going to be one way where you'll be able to get some of the early data before anyone else gets a chance to see it, because the full report won't be out till October 31st. The other way to maybe get a chance to talk to us is you're going to catch Harry Zipper, who's our CEO, speaking with Danielle Bouchon, Danielle, at the Tuesday morning Women in HR Tech panel at 9:30 on creating a culture of data transparency. That's really exciting. And then Cliff and I will be available on Thursday morning at 9:45 at the HR Tech conference on Ask the Experts. That's going to be myself and Cliff, and we're going to be there talking about building your HR system strategy. So lots of opportunities to talk to us, to hear about some of the interesting things that are coming out of this research. We will be kind of all over the HR Technology Conference in Las Vegas, doing podcasts, doing a bunch of interviews. So you also will probably see us on the floor. If you're a vendor, reach out to us for a briefing. We are got a few slots for briefings open, but not many left. Also, right after that event, we'll be in October 7th through the 10th at the iSolved Connect. I don't remember where that's located at, Cliff. Do you know where the iSolved Connect's at this year?
It is in Orlando, Florida.
In Orlando, Florida, just down the road from you, right? Yeah.
Just down the road. I'll be taking the train over there.
Yeah. And then Unit 4 is doing an analyst event up in Pennsylvania, which I think I'll be attending November 6th and 7th. And then UKG is going to be doing their Aspire event once again in the Las Vegas area again on November 12th and 13th. And then we'll also be at the Workday European event November 12th through 14th in London. So busy fall season, and that's not everything yet. We're still kind of trying to decide on a few events, but lots of places to see us and lots of places to connect on the research. Cliff, that is what we're doing, but let's get into all this news. We're already about 10 minutes in and we haven't even started talking about what's going on in the rest of the work, right?
No, a lot of exciting stuff. I think, I'd like to talk about some of the big stories first, because there's quite a bit going on. I think one of the biggest, because it involves two of the larger companies in our world, is Salesforce and Workday, who just recently announced a strategic partnership, sort of centering around an AI agent. If you'll remember, we discussed AI agents as opposed to, AI assistants or AI chatbots about 2 or 3 episodes ago. If you want to hear my sort of very glossed over explanation of, but you can think of it as an AI powered control room where everything's coming in, all these different inputs are in, so that you're able to create more efficient workflows, or if you want to use something as simple as answering questions, sure, it's there, but it's kind of able to pull in a whole lot of different inputs and use that to help guide decision making.
Yeah, this is an employee service agent, as they call it. It will be creating personalized assistant for employee service on use cases such as onboarding, health benefits, career development, both within the Salesforce environment and the Workday environment. I think the interesting thing here is the connection between these two organizations and sort of being able to sort of live in each other's worlds a little bit more cohesively. And it's we've been talking about this for a while. Workday's been slowly getting out of their sort of me stage and getting into the partnership model stage, right? And this is just another, I think, example of how they're stretching and how they're really working towards this idea of how do we fit into the bigger picture ecosystem, but still be the central tool for the data you need on your employee. And that really is kind of the fundamental area where they're focusing here. Now, the interesting thing is you also know that Workday's heavily moving into the financial space as well. And so I think we're going to start to see sort of an interesting morph between Salesforce, Workday kind of HR initially, but then also the financial data as well. And that I think will send some interesting shockwaves to the market as that starts to build out. We know that there's been a lot of sort of moving and shaking and sort of ERP sales sort of spaces, right? And so this is going to create, I think, some more opportunity down the road for synergies in places that we haven't even started to talk about, right? With the CRM, the finance, the HRM, and the enterprise ERP kind of overall systems. What I really think, if you're in the HR space, what you really want to take away from this is you want to understand how those partnerships are working. You want to leverage those partnerships as much as you can by making sure that you have sort of understand sort of the beta testing mode, understanding the roadmaps for them. I think that's going to be the really important thing for you in the HR space. If your organization uses either of these applications or both of them, you want to understand where this fits into your long-term picture for HR, because HR's got to make some decisions about the artificial intelligence they're planning to use. I think this also fits into some of the data we're just starting to see, Cliff. We won't tell you, all of it because we're still doing a little bit of cleaning, but we can tell you the use of just chatbots alone is kind of down from what we saw this week, right?
That's right. Exactly. So yeah, it's kind of moving on to that next level, right? Yeah. And, another thing, and you touched on it, that I thought was interesting is that it would be a shared data foundation, right? One shared source of data, which obviously anytime you're dealing with AI, which I know we sounds like we're kind of a skipping record, which I realize is a completely outdated reference, but just on repeat, there we go, like a song on repeat, is that it's only as good as the data you have. And you think about the combined data of those organizations and what you would be able to leverage with all that information. It goes well beyond, as you just said, just HR or just, this into something that really gets into pure business, ERP and beyond. So yeah. I really thought that was neat. And I think it leads into something we're seeing, and we have been seeing, of this sort of combination of what used to be fairly siloed groups to a certain extent is another story that came out this week, which was Deel acquiring Hofy, or Hofy, possibly Hofy. And, that really brings them into sort of the idea. If you think about what's been interesting about Deel they've come up on the show a lot, right?
Not recently, and they're in the data set pretty extensively this year, even though they
Yeah.
didn't distribute. Yeah.
And, they had gotten savvy, into that sort of people management. They'd gotten pay space in Africa. They already had this, sort of integrating of different pieces of work. And I think this just goes further into it. And in fact, they use this time to announce that they will be bringing out the sort of integration of these two companies into something called Deel IT, which will be a global end-to-end IT service. So being able to take this, device management, data management, combine it with everything they've already got. And what used to be a specialized service will now be part of a whole unit.
Yeah, and this really, I think we got a couple questions about this from some organizations and some of the investment market, right? They're like, really, where's this fit? And I said, I think this is actually a pretty smart move by Deel. We definitely saw Rippling jump in with a kind of HR use case that includes an IT component to it. Understanding that particularly for the SMB market, which is where a lot of these organizations play, the two things that connect most in the first couple of days is paying people and getting them their equipment, especially if I do have a virtual group of employees who are dispersed around the globe. And doing that in a global way is really difficult. We know that Deel's got a lot of competitors coming up in the market who are looking at global payroll. Helios is going to be one of them. They've already announced some of the work that they're coming out with. We're definitely seeing Rippling coming up as focusing on global plus this. We're seeing a lot of the other pays, right, starting to add deeper relationships on a global front. So that global payroll is going to be a big conversation in this next year, particularly for mid-market and SMB here. But I think part of what Deel and a couple of others are realizing is the success we're seeing come out of someone like a ServiceNow. ServiceNow is another organization that has deep roots in the IT space, deep roots in sort of that help desk conversation, but they're also sort of moving very quickly and very heavily into the HR space, the onboarding, the workforce, the rules you need to put in place for workflows to sort of manage workforce workflows. Those kind of things are powerful, and we're seeing those two things sort of merge together. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes over the next 6 months to a year, but I'm not surprised by this. And I think everyone should be really watching for these connections across the systems, particularly in the mid-market SMB. I think it's a little harder at the enterprise level, 5,000 plus, because they've already got big systems managing a lot of these things separately. But we are seeing the need to integrate that data, which is kind of the Salesforce and the Workday conversation, right?
Yeah. And, getting on to what you mentioned about ServiceNow, that actually we saw some news from them that they exceeded what they were sort of expecting from the last quarter, and raised outlook for future quarters, which may seem, okay, well, that's of interest to investors, but really it just shows the market and what people are seeing. We also saw Paychex at the same time, almost the same day, announced that they had hit a bunch of different milestones within their retirement plans and the different services that they offer and different software that they offer around there. They have 120,000 401k clients now. They've added 34,000 employees to their Paychex pooled employer plan. Sorry, another retirement plan. I realized I was about to say, why couldn't they call it a pension plan? I realized it would be the same problem, the Paychex pension plan. So yeah, those two are kind of, we were thinking of those together because it really just shows growth in these areas.
Yeah, the market, I think, is growing in unexpected ways, which is part of why we're seeing this sort of weird mix of layoffs in one area and increases in other areas, right? And it's hard sometimes to understand that some of the more traditional things that we've seen a lot of growth and a lot of investment over there are maybe not holding as much stability, but we're seeing sort of these fringe areas, and they're not all AI driven. A lot of them are just better management of data, because one of the things that we saw this year as well as last year is data management issues as a challenge for organizations. Can't get to AI if I don't have good data, right? And so a lot of this is dealing with that data. On the Paychex one, and just up front, we, again, sneak peek for those of you who are here, keep an eye out for benefits. We're seeing a lot of movement in that space. It will be a topic that you're going to see come out of the research this year. It definitely shows up in what we're seeing investments. It's not just investments in, retirement is one big conversation that we're definitely having in the market as the next generation starts to move and think about what they want their retirement models to look like. But we're also seeing a lot of conversation about what kind of benefits make the most sense for workforces in all the different regions. And we're definitely looking at more personalized benefits for organizations and their employees. So that's a conversation I think you're going to see a lot more of in this space, Cliff.
Yeah. And, speaking about, all the stuff going on and personnel moves and layoffs and everything else, another big news, definitely one I didn't see coming at all. UKG has named Jennifer Morgan as their chief executive officer, which means Chris Todd will be stepping down. So this is one definitely caught me by surprise, although I will say, she's not new to the organization, although she had been, as a co-chief CEO at SAP, had been on the board for UKG since 2021. So this is someone that knows the organization well. Have you had any, thoughts on this? I know this is kind of new and we couldn't even talk about it for a while, but I'd love to hear what you have to think.
I mean, the announcement came out. They were holding this one really close to the vest. I mean, I'm not as surprised. I think, there was a lot of transition between the merger and acquisition. We know the private equity firm that owns this group and the investors are really looking at probably doing something big with the organization in the next year, right? Whether that's an IPO or another sell or another big investment. And so I think, it has been a year of change in the UKG environment, especially for those who were past employees, but even for the customers. And so I think part of what my expectation is here is that they were really wanting to head out of the gate, especially heading into next year and into this sort of fourth quarter, with a big bang of, hey, we are taking seriously where we want to head, right? And so Jennifer Morgan, I know her from her days at SAP. She was a really strong leader in that organization. And at her time at SAP as co-CEO was shorter than I think everybody expected. And they were really surprised when they had made some of the changes at the top of SAP and felt like she didn't get a chance to show the kind of things that she could bring to an organization. So I really like Jennifer and her background and what she brings to this organization. I think UKG has a lot of opportunity right now to fix some things that they broke in the last couple of months through kind of the pace at which they move through the layoffs. Also, some of the things the challenges they've had over the last 6 months to a year with sort of the customer sort of changes that they've made around customer care. A lot of that was they were working on fixing some situations they knew had happened because of the merger acquisition, because of the transition from on-premise workforce management systems to cloud workforce management systems. They were going through some of the things that many organizations had taken years and years to go through in the matter of like 2 or 3 years, right? And so it's really important to understand that this is one of the largest HR technology firms in the market. It serves, I think, somewhere in the range of 80,000 customers when you bring in all the different pieces, especially with the Great Places to Work data set. And so it is imperative that they very carefully think about who's going to lead them into the future. That being said, I want to acknowledge that Chris Todd did a masterful job at keeping an organization calm and moving forward and moving smoothly amidst some of the most difficult things an organization could face. They faced a cybersecurity risk.
That's right.
They faced a merger acquisition. They faced new leadership in their product areas across the board. They faced the series of layoffs. And I think, his calmness really helped in all of those areas. I do think that this opportunity for UKG is to really embrace what Jennifer brings to the table, not only her approach to products and her approach to business, which I think is some of the most solid background I've ever seen in the market, but also her, I think, savviness and understanding who the client is. That's what I've always sort of appreciated when I look at where she's been and her background and her experience that she brings to the table is she does understand the investors, she understands the partners, and she understands the buyers. And that's a space I think you're going to need to have strength in all three of those areas to pull off what UKG is trying to pull off, which is compete with the biggest HR technology vendors in the market, right? And play, as we often say, play with the big boys, right? And that is really what's happening here. And I think she's fabulous and a great choice for doing that. What I hope on our front we'll get to see is we're going to have a bunch of new data this year on voice the customer. My goal is to continue to watch that voice the customer over the next year or so. I think, Cliff, you'll be right with me on doing that and making sure that we share your thoughts, your comments, things that are working or not working, so we can give them some of the feedback on how these transitions are impacting their customers, right?
That's exactly what it comes down to. It is how is it going to affect, the end users, right? And sort of on that note, we did see some sort of news about a group that we talk about, and then, we went all the way sort of from the CEO down to the people that can be affected by small things. There was one from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It's a United States group that, does kind of pretty much what it says in their title. And they proposed a rule that basically on transparency and disclosure. So the workers know the costs and fees of what they call paycheck advance products that we often call an earned wage access. I think that's what we say in the paper too. And that's something that we always are looking at, who is offering it and to whom, which groups are getting it and what is the uptake on it. And they talk about this sort of idea being that, yes, there's all these new offerings to what are usually some of your lowest wage earners, right? Because they're the ones that would need that access, right? I need that money today to get me gas to go to work. These are very real situations that a lot of workers find themselves in. Now, what they're saying is that there needs to be transparency in how is that being done? Are they receiving a fee to access their funds early or not? All they're asking for is transparency. It makes total sense to me. But again, it's just in the proposal stage, but something that falls under sort of a Department of Labor oversight, and it does show that this has sort of reached, a high enough level that people are thinking about this.
Yeah. And it's important. We don't actually have a huge percentage of organizations taking advantage of this, right? But we know from our research that the employees themselves feel that this is, particularly those who are in hourly workforce, feel that earned wage access is a really important benefit for them. We also found in some of our research about 2 years ago that the HR function themselves found this could be a real valuable tool for allowing them to be more flexible in how they handled paycheck runs and those kind of things, and managed, which always happens no matter how good your payroll function is, manage those times when there were errors in the paycheck run and they needed to make an employee whole as quickly as possible, right? Those are things that, earned wage access oftentimes doesn't get attention for. I do think that, it is a space that needs oversight. When the interest rates were low and organizations were able to fund this through existing bank funds, it was really powerful that we saw a lot of the larger vendors like Dayforce and some of the others who were funding this earned wage access out of their sort of own sort of bank management model, right? We didn't know how long that was going to last. As interest rates go up, things kind of change, right? Those kind of conversations might be having some additional conversations in the market, right? But we also saw that this is a space that is impacting, and I think both in a positive and sometimes not positive, some of the challenges that frontline workers have. When we think about sort of their pay models, and you mentioned this perfectly, is that if you've never lived paycheck to paycheck, or you've never had to take out a payday loan and pay the exorbitant 20 or 30% interest, right? Yes, right. Which, let's take it just one step down from a loan shark, right? For professionals and workers who are in that situation, something like earned wage access can mean the difference between sort of their ability to, get a new refrigerator when it breaks or not, and going weeks or months without a refrigerator in their household, right? Like those are things that happen in real life. And so I'm a big proponent of leveraging the earned wage access model in a transparent and open way. My kids, who are much younger in this market and who have a really different perspective on this, are definitely open to the idea that, hey, why should the company hold on to the money that I've earned for them versus me having access to it, which was a different perspective from what I had. And so there's been some of that conversation in my household. I think there's been some of that. I think there will be more of that conversation as generations sort of shift through the workforce. So I think you're going to hear more about this. I hope the regulations don't scare companies away from this. I think this is much like anything else. It could be a really powerful benefit, but you got to manage it just like everything else with ethics, right? Yeah.
And, speaking of sort of underserved populations and groups that don't get talked a lot, that was actually a post that you had sent me that I found just fascinating. Allison Byers wrote a post from a panel she went on to, the Yale Ventures. They've been doing this for 10 years and is obviously sponsored by Yale University, and they have an innovation summit. And they looked at some data on who's receiving funding for venture capital. And when they look at the total amount that's out there and sort of what's accessible, just some astounding numbers. I'm just going to read some of the highlights that were just shocking. 98% of VC and venture capital dollars inaccessible to women founders. 99.5 of those VC dollars are inaccessible to Black founders. And then you imagine the intersection of that, right? Black women founders, it's basically zero. And, for some of the same fundamental reasons we see with a lot of performance management bias, right? Which is, or something you see in recruitment might be another example, in that you say, okay, well, this is who's been successful in the past, and therefore who fits that profile going forward in the future. And because if you've only ever had, seen white men be successful, then it would make sort of quote unquote logical sense to push it on. And you have to look at it a different way, right? And that's, I think, in a weird way, an AI issue. And I'm not just shoehorning this in because we're, legally obligated to always talk about AI, but because it's the idea of you are only taking a certain data set and applying it, it's going to give you skewed results that you may not realize until someone throws up these absolutely astounding numbers. And especially in how much we talk about funding here and where we've seen interest in going and not really diving into that. So I just found that sort of thing interesting. And again, I wanted to, I think we wanted to talk about it because, we're kind of talking about the CEO level and not so much what's happening before that or like the people with earned wage access. So pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's a challenge in the market. I think, I talk a lot to one of our, one of the organizations that I work with a lot on investments, and, women-led organizations, there's a lot of them, and particularly globally, right? When you think about sort of the women entrepreneurs in the market, it is not a lack of women who are being entrepreneurs, right? Like many of them start out businesses as part of how they're taking care of their households, right? What is lacking, though, is this funding model that is in place. And I've seen this over and over again when we have organizations come to us who are trying to decide, funding decision-making processes, right? And what I think is for those who are buyers, right, in this space on the HR tech side, and you're looking at solutions, look at how an organization started, what are the founders' values and backgrounds, and how were they funded? That's a question you should be comfortable asking about any technology that you're looking at, right? What are their ethics around the AI conversation? What is their goal around meeting the needs of the business as well as meeting the needs of their employees? Those are all things that we ask every day of our companies. You should be able to ask them of any partner or company that you're working with, right? As well, just to understand, right? You may not change your decision, but it might at least inform some of the conversations you're having about what you'd like to see from organizations. Because the more we say, like, look, we'd like to see this in the world that we're in, the more I think we'll get some realization that these investments could be sort of done in a different way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I like what you said there too about, really thinking about the impact on the work. This was something that I've noticed is a sort of theme. This happens a lot when we're doing these. You start to notice unintentionally some thematic stuff in here. And I think maybe because there was something in the air about our report and how much we talk about the business impact, but really great research that was done, passed on to us by Stacey Harris. Thank you, Stacey. We'll have her links in the show notes and in the comments. But this was from Red Thread by Stacey Harris, right? And they launched some reports on manager effectiveness. And the sort of ones that stuck out to me, it's a large report. You can get your copy. The link will be in there. But, it goes beyond sort of just this idea of productivity. And so much of our talk about AI and even about some of the tools earlier, we talk about individual productivity, but not the relationships and how that affects the business outcomes, right? So one of the things they looked at is when employees believe that their manager is highly effective, not they themselves, not their manager making them more effective, but their manager is highly effective at doing all the things a manager does. Those organizations were 3 times as likely to have a positive NPS score. We're nearly 2 times as likely those individuals report themselves as productive, right? To really see what's happening. And almost twice as likely to be highly engaged, which, for those of us that work in that space in HR know that is in itself a very powerful metric. So yeah, it's really a big call to action for improved manager effectiveness.
This one shouted out to me, and I've known Stacia for years. We have been good friends. We worked together very closely at Burson Associates back in the day when we were sort of employee 13, and I don't know what Stacia's number was, but she was shortly after I was hired. And what I think early on realized is that you can do a lot of research about practices and processes and technology and what HR does, but a lot of it comes down to, how much you're sort of layering into the workload of the employees themselves, right? You can have the best HR processes, but if the workforce is overwhelmed or not given the time to do the work, it really isn't going to get you some of the outcomes that you need to get. I loved where Stacia's going with this, with the team management conversation. I think we're going at it a different way from what we're finding. So, and then these things are sort of converging, as you said. We're even looking a lot at change. How much change is an organization able to handle? What is the impact of change within an organization? And how do you lead through change? And so what I really liked is how these two conversations, I think, go hand in hand, is that manager effectiveness is extensively pretty down. At least the feeling that the managers feel they are less effective since 2020 at a pretty shocking rate from what Stacia had found. We're finding similarly that there has been less investment in change management since 2020, right? Like, so, we could be, Stacia and I might have to maybe go out and do a little bit of a duo conversation on this, because we've got to realize that as exciting as change is, and it's how much we've got to learn to just be agile, as the conversation everybody has, there's just only so much change that a human being can handle at some point, right? And so we're really talking a lot about this idea of change leadership, which is how do you effectively manage the amount of change your organization is handling versus letting change manage you, which is the other side of that conversation. And you can have a say, and you do have a say as both HR and business leader and manager. And if you want business outcomes, that is a lever you have to take into consideration, along with how much you're training, along with how much you're investing in new technologies, along with how much you're investing in AI. You've got to sort of build all of that into your model. And so I really was, this research spoke to me from what Stacia had done. I think she had quite a few of her team members work with her on this. And I know this is a big part of, Stacia's long-term sort of goal to sort of really help organizations understand the effectiveness of the workforce. So I'm excited to see this go out. So we'll put a link for everybody out there in it. And maybe Stacia and I can work on a tap dancing routine that's talking about manager effectiveness and change leadership. So we'll let you know if that comes out. Stacey's probably laughing her right now uncontrollably if she listens to this. And I'll tell her, I'll give her a call. We'll figure out the dates for it.
Sounds good. And something, sort of tying a lot of these ideas together was a really thoughtful post. It really harkens back to something we talked about in the last episode, right? If we remember that we were seeing that Sherm had, was talking about removing, the equity from the DEI conversation. And, so there's this idea, sort of floating around, this RIP to DEIB, right? And just brilliant post that we saw from Michael Bush over at Great Place to Work. Great title, too. He said, RIP to DEIB, it was never really alive, in saying that despite all this great data on how you can create innovation and engagement and all these things at work, just true numbers, even in things like stock price and EBITDA and free cash flow, having these more diverse and equitable, workplaces is all correlated to that. But yet, here we are. Instead of embracing that, we're finding the people in certain areas are saying, no, we want less. And maybe this isn't important, And he makes a great point, and it's well worth the whole read. But I'm going to quote directly: "Is it better to have a blowout quarter or 1,000 great quarters? Because the earth must be healthy and whole for 1,000 great quarters." That doesn't sound like being woke to me. It sounds like a plan to make a lot more money for 500 years. And I like that, right? Because he's making the point that it's too often put in opposition to making money. Like, this is something could stand in our way. He's like, no, this makes you money. So why are we talking about getting rid of something that would make us money? And it just needs to be framed differently. I think. So a really good sort of beyond a counterpoint to what we hear, but just, like maybe just like in the last thing we were talking about, maybe you need to frame it differently in your head and how you're thinking about these things.
Yeah, this really harkened back to the roundtable that we just had last week in Raleigh here. Very similar conversations. That was one of the reasons I called this out. I put a text out to Michael and I said, look, this is so on point with what we're hearing from the HR professionals on the front line in this conversation. We had the head of Lenovo's, I'm not going to remember it, but he sort of managed not the investment group, but the portfolio group. For Lenovo, came and he said, the session we held, he left that feeling more encouraged than he had in any other session over the last year and a half, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and engagement inside organizations. And that was powerful to me because I think that's been this sort of, it's been this conflict conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of it has to do with politics. We know where we're all at with that. I mean, we don't have to rehash that, but it also has to do with the misunderstanding of just the reality of the facts, right? We've said this in our data that, when we did our last employee survey data, like of employees, right? The percentage of those who are in the workforce who identify as baby boomers who are people of color was 8%, right? That kind of fits what we know of the labor statistics, the data. The percentage of those who responded to our survey who were in what can be considered the Gen Z generation, right? Those age groups at least, 47% of them identified themselves as a person of color. Now, that kind of fits with what we're seeing in the labor data, that we're seeing just surely more diverse people in the workforce over the next, 10 years. It's just going to happen, right? And with that comes more ideas and more cultures and more backgrounds and more opportunities to think a little differently. The buyers are going to be, coming from different backgrounds and cultures. And it's diversity on a lot of levels, on thinking, on neurodiversity, on race, on gender, on, sexual orientation. All of those things kind of play into the bigger picture, right? And so what we found in our conversation with the roundtable here, and I think Michael Bush really eloquently put it, was because we're in Raleigh, North Carolina here, the conversations in some places were, yes, our company's embracing everything about this. And we know that in many cases we disagree as individuals sometimes, but as a company, here's kind of, we agree to disagree in areas. And as our stance as a company is sort of, once we agree that this is our stance as a company, we go forward with it and everybody has to move in the same direction from that perspective. But the other conversation was, hey, if my senior leaders are not embracing just the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion in one fashion, I have to figure out how do I explain it to them in words that they do sort of understand, that meet them at the place where their heads are at, which is how do I keep a business open? Or how do I make sure that my organization is surviving this wave of AI, right? Culture seems like a taboo conversation when you're just trying to figure out how to make payroll over the next month, right? And so what a lot of organizations are doing is really talking about this as retention programs, really thinking about this as innovation efforts. And that shifting, again, reframing of the conversation is allowing the discussions to go on in a way that I think SHRM kind of missed the boat on in what they did, right? I think I understood where SHRM was trying to get to with the conversations, but I think they made it more political in some sense instead of less. Instead of sort of really honing in on what we're trying to accomplish as a group of people and how we're trying to work together, they created some tension in the market. I shouldn't say some, they created a lot of tension in the market. It was an underlying current to a lot of the conversation we had last week. But I think Michael really, says it best here. He is a CEO of a business operating in 170 countries, partnering with executives from 25,000 of the greatest brands and companies in the world. And when my business takes me around the world, those meeting rooms show progress at the table in all spaces, right? We have to acknowledge that progress and we have to acknowledge the power of what we're doing, right? So I liked what he said. I think everybody's got to sort of take this with an understanding of how it's going to impact their business and their world. But I think the most important thing is to think about what we can do as a group of people working together, right?
Yeah. And honestly, I want to leave it on that. That seems like a good place to finish. I will mention that Great Place to Work, actually, they had a blog come out. This one wasn't from Michael, but talking about the impact of AI and employee trust. I'll leave a link to that so people can look into that, because I think it's an important conversation when we're talking about AI, that different generations look at it differently, and it could be seen as a retention or attraction tool as well. But that positive note that you ended on, I think, is a perfect summary of everything that we've talked about today. So thank you.
I know we went a little long today, guys. I apologize. Cliff says this is beginning to get to be my brand. I know it's good conversation. So hopefully you can join us in the conversations as we wrap today. Just a reminder, if you're looking to catch up with one of us, please be sure to connect with us on LinkedIn, connect with us on Twitter. I think on X, and on Link and Instagram and Facebook. I think we're in all those places.
Yep. And YouTube, of course, you can always leave comments on there.
Oh, that's right. Yes, our YouTube. That's actually a growing location for people to access us. We're looking for questions. If you want something you want us to cover, or if there's an event you think you'd like us to attend, or a place where you'd like us to have a conversation, reach out to either of us. We'd love to have those conversations. Also, be sure to go to our website if you want to find out where we're going to be at, what's happening, when the newest research is going to come out. Sign up for our newsletter to get ongoing updates on the research launches, where we'll be speaking, and when you can participate in the annual survey. It will open again next year. Be sure to listen to our sister HR Huddle podcast. We have a problem, hosted by our CEO, Terry Zipper. And please put likes and comments here if you're listening to this, because that always helps us, obviously raise up the number of listeners and the amount of people who are listening. Big thanks to everyone who helps put this together. Cliff, thank you for pulling all the articles together, putting out the notes afterwards, because I know that's very helpful for a lot of people. Thank you to Brand Method Media Group, who is run by Kelly, for helping produce all this, including the new video version of this, which requires us to do a little bit of additional work. And our marketing team also as well. We really want to appreciate all the work they do in making sure this gets out into the market. And thanks to our listeners and community. We couldn't do this without you. You guys really make this possible. And that's it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. Cliff, this makes me think we need to start drinking tea on the show. We haven't really done that now that we're on video. Okay, sorry guys, off on a tangent. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another pot of boiling hot HR Tech updates and insights for everyone. Bye guys.